Welcome to Speaking Candidly with Candace, where we talk in depth with everyday people about their fears and their struggles and how they have overcome them. I'm your host, Candace Schoner, and I hope over the next half hour you will be engaged, enlightened, and inspired to live your best life. My guest today is Michele Zaire. Michele is the Director and founder of the Center for Earth-Based Healing, which provides psychological, physical, emotional, and spiritual support to victims of trauma. Michele has a master's in adult education and social justice. Michele is also an accomplished musician and songwriter and served in the U.S. Marine Corps from 1996 to 2000. Welcome, Michele.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Candace.
Well, I guess we'll just start off with your career, which has been spent predominantly helping victims of sexual abuse and domestic violence. I know you've studied educational adult and have worked in that field. What led you in that direction?
Yeah, so that's a big question, of course. So when I was working on my second graduate degree in social justice education with an emphasis in women's and gender studies, I kind of had my world blown open, let's just say, of learning a lot of things about feminist theory and the way oppression and violence operates very subtly in our culture. And it kind of gave me the language that I needed to talk about the things that I had not been able to talk about, but I just kind of intuitively knew as a woman. And that was sort of the first major seed that was planted. And, life sort of happened. I ended up here in Charlottesville, and I did a little bit of volunteering with SARA, the Sexual Assault Resource Agency.
Great organization.
And then ended up working there as their adult advocate. That's kind of how I got my foot into the field about a decade ago now. And, I've done a lot of different things and a lot of different careers and a lot of non-traditional things as a woman. But once I found this field, working with trauma survivors, I kind of really felt like, okay, these are my people.
These are your people.
Yeah.
Well, when did you start the Center for Earth-Based Healing? And I know, and before you answer that question, I do know that your funding has been cut and things are a little tenuous at this point.
Yeah.
But tell me about when you founded it and what you've accomplished so far, and hopefully moving forward you'll get the funding to continue.
Yeah, so the Center for Earth-Based Healing, this is something that came about, again, because of having worked in the field. There was a woman named Deb Downing who had created a camp for survivors of sexual violence back in 2005. Our paths crossed, and when I found out what she was doing, which was using Mother Nature as a healer, working with trauma survivors, and I completely believe in it's called ecotherapy. She said, look, I'm going to do this a few more years, and I would like for you to be my successor and take my vision and grow it. So the camp didn't have like a home per se. It was just a thing that she did from her heart. So when that happened, I was like, well, if I'm going to grow this, then I need an infrastructure and a way to apply for funding. So that's when I created the Center for Earth-Based Healing, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and I formed it in 2015. And then waited, because I'd heard through the grapevine there was some federal grant funding that was going to be for new initiatives like mine. We did get that first federal grant that was for 3 years back in the end of 2016. And with that money, we were able to double the number of programs we offer from 1 to 2. Designed a training, and I traveled 4,000 miles around Virginia and trained over 400 professionals on trauma-informed ecotherapy, which is not something that people know a lot about here in Virginia. And in that time, the application numbers tripled for our programs.
Wow.
And so there's this huge demand for what we're doing. But again, this is a new idea and a new concept on the East Coast. I should make that point. This trauma-informed ecotherapy and just ecotherapy in general has been offered in places like in California and Colorado for many, many years. But as all things happen, a vision is a living, growing thing.
Right.
And so, the federal funding was discontinued unexpectedly for 30 organizations in Virginia, not just mine. And what that did was, where we're at is we've created a revisioning council, and we are just going to push pause on offering any programs for 2020. and go back to the drawing board, keep the resources that we do still currently have, and ask ourselves, can we do what we do in a way that costs less money, but maybe accesses more survivors and actually all survivors? Because our programs, because of the way they're designed, have served predominantly able-bodied cisgender women, because we're co-housing and sharing bunk rooms and things like that. And I am a social justice advocate, so there's no demographic of people who are immune to sexual and domestic violence. Unfortunately, it affects everybody, including men and boys. So what I would like to do in this revisioning process with this council of individuals who are stepping up to say, yes, we believe in this, is ask ourselves, can we create something that is accessible to everybody? So we're planning on spending 2020 doing that, and we have a little bit of money in the bank to support what's asking to happen next. So I feel like I'm the holder of a vision, and I am fine riding this wave of uncertainty, and probably by the end of 2020, either something new will have emerged, or we'll need more time, or we'll have clarity that it's time to just move on. So,
well, you are definitely a true trailblazer.
Yeah.
And the fact that I didn't read in any of your resume that you had business training and basically working through this nonprofit requires some knowledge of business.
Yeah. In fact, I was fortunate enough to attend the CIC, the collaborative, the business model class here in Charlottesville. And that was really helpful for some just basic things about business. But, you know, life prepares us for where we end up. So at one point in time, as a part-time job, I was a bookkeeper, and so I had the skills to set up the books and the financial side of things. You know, and so I've taken skills from various things that I've done in my life and have been able to put it into this. So again, you know, I'm not panicking about the Center for Earth-Based Healing. I really do believe this is a vision that wants to live. I feel like my job is to treat it like a little baby and ask it what does it want to become, and just to be a good steward to this beautiful vision that I know changes lives.
It does change lives.
It does.
And I think, you know, that is a part of the culture that we don't always talk about. It's very hard to discuss sexual assault. And so I am hoping that you will continue it and you'll get the funding that you need. I have to ask, and if you don't mind, you seem relatively young in your appearance to have accomplished all that you have accomplished. Do you mind saying how old you are?
Yeah, I'm 46.
46,
yeah.
okay.
I've had a rich, full life of many adventures, done some crazy things. I don't know how my life ended up that way, but it just did, and I have a tendency of saying yes. You know, I really do. My personal motto is no regrets. So when I get to the end of my life, whenever that is, I do not want to regret anything that I've said I would or would not do in my life. So when an opportunity is presented to me that my heart resonates with, even if I don't have any idea how I'm going to make it happen, I'm going to at least try. And because of that, I've had a really rich life with lots of great experiences and met a million wonderful people and have been able to pull on all of this experience.
Do you have any role models out there that you look up to?
So, you know, I think it's not so much like individuals that I look up to as it is, there are people that I read, people like Brene Brown, Power of Vulnerability. If folks don't know her, please Google Brene Brown and the Power of Vulnerability, her TED Talk. Joseph Campbell, who's deceased, but I'm a big fan of his writings and the hero's journey. I like Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love.
Yep.
And so I do look towards and resonate with people who have the courage to try something different and maybe not be in the box all the time.
Talk about trying something different. You were in the U.S. Marine Corps back in 1996.
Yep.
Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so, you know, this was not something that I grew up going, oh, I want to be in the Marines. I actually got a music degree and I wanted to play music. And so there are a lot of military bands and I auditioned and I made it. So yeah, I went into the Marine Corps in 1996 as a Marine musician. Went to boot camp. Yes, musicians are real Marines. A lot of people ask us that. And was fortunately stationed in Hawaii for 3 years and performed in the Marine Forces Pacific Band and got to tour around, you know, Singapore and Fiji and the Kingdom of Tonga. And then I also have other jobs, such as in charge of our public affairs office. And then I was what's called a primary marksmanship instructor, which meant that I taught Marines how to shoot the M16 and the 9mm pistol.
That is quite diverse.
It's a weird combination of skills, no doubt.
It's unusual to say the least. And I want to talk about your experience with using M16s and other guns and teaching other people how to use them. How you feel about the Second Amendment? Obviously, it's a controversial topic, and I don't want to get too political.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting to hear your perspective as a former U.S. Marine.
Yeah. So, I have never personally owned a gun. I personally still do not own a gun, and I do not want to own a gun. I do not want one in my home. Let me put it that way. I have some personal reasons for that. However, I live in a very rural area in Nelson County, and I think cultural context is really important. And so where I live, there are people who need guns to feed themselves and their families. And my personal opinion is, if a weapon serves a practical purpose in our lives, that enriches our lives and allows us to feed our families, and there's an actual reason that gun serves, I'm fine with that. What the purpose is of having a whole, collection of assault rifles and weapons, I don't personally understand that. Do I think somebody should have that right taken away? Not necessarily, but I do think we need to have a serious conversation about what purpose weapons serve in our culture, in our community in 2019. And that's probably...
I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit to the military. And I know that you're openly gay.
Yeah.
And during the time you were in the military, it was don't ask, don't tell.
Yes.
How did that affect you? As someone who seems to be very open and honest about who they are and how they feel, and also training other people, what were some of your experiences?
It was horrendous. I experienced a lot of oppression, and don't ask, don't tell. It was only part of the name of that bill. It's actually don't ask, don't tell, don't pursue, don't harass. People forgot about the last half of that. And my very first night of boot camp, I started getting harassed.
Wow.
And I was not out. I mean, I didn't say that I was a queer woman because you couldn't. My part of that was don't tell.
Right.
And for 4 years, I actually did not feel safe because of the harassment.
But did they harass you because you were a female, you think, or did they know somehow that you were queer?
So, the Marine Corps, there's only about 50% of the women who go into Marine Corps boot camp make it through. So there's a much higher number of men in the Marine Corps than women. So there's already some stuff going on there, dynamic-wise, with patriarchy, and it's reflected in our bigger culture. So yes, there's always the possibility that sexism, for me being a woman, could have been part of it. But the kinds of comments that were being made were very, very clear that it was about them suspecting that I was a queer woman. Like, look at that one over there, she wants to be a guy. Because I had short hair.
But don't all the women in the military have short hair?
No.
No.
They want it to be in an attractive feminine style, and I actually was really humiliated and embarrassed because a higher ranking person decided that my haircut was too short for a woman.
Wow.
I was also forced to buy makeup and wear it in boot camp.
Unbelievable.
For certain kinds of inspections. So, I am really glad I joined, and I'm really glad that I served my country. I'm really proud of that. But again, I think we need to have a bigger conversation about, what purpose does it serve to continue oppressing people who are signing up to serve their country? I did a damn good job. I was an honor graduate in boot camp, selected by my peers as the recruit who most exhibited the attributes of a United States Marine. So I was really proud of that.
And you should be.
And, I was a great shooter and didn't even know I had that skill because I hadn't really shot guns going into into boot camp. I do know don't ask, don't tell has been dropped, but you don't change institutional culture just because you said, okay, we're going to change a piece of paper.
Right.
There's much, much longer and bigger conversations that have to be had. So I personally experienced a lot of harassment, and it was oftentimes pretty stressful.
Is that why you left after 4 years?
It was the main reason, because I didn't feel safe. And the other reason was, I think, my leadership style and just who I am as a person. It wasn't necessarily the best match because by the time that I got out of the Marine Corps, my nickname in my unit was the humanitarian sergeant, which is a little bit of an oxymoron in the Marine Corps.
Like
And it was just because I really believe in being curious about people and helping them, supporting them versus just punishing when they mess up. Usually when people act out, it's not because they're trying to be jerks. Usually there's something going on, and a little bit of compassion can go a long way. And so that was always my approach as the assistant platoon sergeant in my unit. But you know, there were just a few too many things that weren't quite enough of a match for me to want to stay in. And also, I was refusing to give any more of my time to an organization, institution where I could not be fully who I was. I refused to hide who I was for any more time than I had to.
When you started in the U.S. Marine Corps, was it to get your education paid for? What was the reason to actually start?
It was because I really wanted to play music.
Oh, because that's right, you did say.
Yeah, I already had a
that you
bachelor's
applied.
degree. Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, it was really because I just wanted to continue performing music. Yeah, it wasn't because I wanted to go to war. It wasn't because I wanted to kill people. You know, and a lot of us who went in between 96 to 2000, it was right in between the major public conflicts, I should say. It didn't feel like at that time we were going to be entering into another big war. And so there were many of us who went in and wanting to, you know, serve our country in ways that our skills allowed us to. And yeah, you know, and then of course, you know, 9/11 happened shortly after I got out in 2000, and so I kind of was right in between all of these major conflicts,
Right.
and I'm personally grateful. I mean, yes, I would have done my duty,
Sure.
and had we been deployed, would have done my job, but I am grateful that I did not have to go through that trauma, because it is a traumatic experience to go to war.
Which also tells me that you can relate to victims of survivor trauma.
Yeah.
Because you have experienced it yourself.
Sure, sure. I mean, and I will openly admit, I am a survivor of sexual and domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, going to school and getting that graduate degree was part of my own journey of realizing, oh my gosh, you know, this wasn't just me. You know, there used to be an old feminist saying that the personal is political. Mm-hmm. And that means if it's happening to you, it's likely happening to a lot of people. And, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't talk about this stuff. So, you know, there's always been a part of me that's been an advocate since I came out of the womb. And it's just been my own life experiences and my education and all of the kind of crazy things I've done in career that have all kind of come together. And then backpacking the Appalachian Trail as well. It changed my life, and it was when my deep connection with Mother Earth just really solidified, and it healed me in ways that I can't even explain.
Yeah.
So then getting to now bring social justice advocacy and healing with Mother Earth and with trauma survivors, all of a sudden here are all these things that I've done that are merging professionally. And so is that a coincidence? I don't know. I mean, you can really say, right? I'm just saying yes and trying to show up to the best of my ability.
Well, I think it's remarkable what you have done. And
Thanks.
Given the circumstances, what would you tell people who are part of the Me Too movement, or people who are not part of the Me Too movement?
Mm-hmm. Just in general?
In general, yeah.
Nobody has the right to tell you what you did or did not experience, and that your experiences, however you experience them, are valid. And B, you know, we have a long ways to go in our culture to start understanding trauma, you know, the effects that it has on people. Even if it's something that happens in the womb, we're finding now that even in the womb, whatever's happening in the environment for the mother, that is still affecting the development of the brain and the nervous system of that baby. And then when we come out of the womb and in early childhood, again, it's all the way that our brain and our neurological systems are formed under whatever situations and circumstances we're being raised in. And so, you know, when people say, oh, something that happened 30 years ago, it shouldn't be bothering me now, it absolutely does. It's completely valid if that happens. Right. And so, you know, I say find a lot of support and take good care of yourself, because you deserve it. You know, nobody asks to have trauma happen to them. And trauma in its most fundamental sense can be defined as something that's too much, too fast, and too soon. Too soon meaning developmentally, you know. And I don't personally believe anybody makes it through life without experiencing trauma. I think everybody is a trauma survivor in some way. Yeah, and no two people experience a traumatic experience the same way, you know. So I just think, again, you know, I'm watching slowly as our culture is evolving and conversations are evolving around this stuff, but we need to stay in the game and keep exploring.
Well, I think now there's more celebrities lending a voice to it, which may be helpful. There are also still people who are struggling to figure out their own trauma and why
Yeah.
they behave
Absolutely.
the way that they do.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of talk therapy? Are you a fan of music therapy? What do you recommend for people who, again, are not sure whether they are a survivor of sexual abuse or whatever, or questioning themselves and is it their fault?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's not their fault. I'll make that statement until the day that I die. Nobody asks for this stuff to happen to them. And I don't care what the circumstances are. It is not their fault if somebody violated them without their consent. You know, the best thing we can do for survivors is believe them and stop blaming them. Because we have a culture of doing that too. So,
Absolutely.
you know, there are a lot of options and ways to heal from trauma, and I think we all have to like figure out which way resonates with us. So talk therapy, I think, is a great starting place, and I think it's essential because it helps us frame our experiences and understand it in a way that maybe we couldn't before. And I think it's really important, however, to do the homework on the therapists that we work with and make sure that they are trauma therapists, that they are trained to work with trauma survivors. That's very important. So there's talk therapy, but what I do in my organization is ecotherapy, and it's a lot about, the way I describe it is talk therapy is from the neck up, and everything that I get to do with trauma survivors is from the neck down. And so trauma is experienced in the body, and trauma is held in the body, and our nervous systems form around all of that. So, you know, sometimes people find talk therapy very, very helpful, but then they realize, gosh, I know and I understand, but I still feel badly in my body. And so there's something called somatic experiencing, which I have training in, which helps a person's body finish resolving the trauma that's in the body. You know, panic attacks, that's an example. Flashbacks, PTSD, all of this stuff. And then, you know, there's, creative modalities, which is something I'm doing now with some part-time work working with survivors of domestic violence, using music and painting and ecotherapy and art and weaving and making birdhouses or whatever kind of creative ways to try to express what maybe we can't put into words, because not all trauma happens at a time in our life when we are even verbal.
Right.
You know, so it doesn't get stored in verbal parts of our brain. And so I think, you know, finding and having the courage to experiment with as many different ways to heal ourselves, I think we deserve that. And I think it's the ultimate act of self-love to give ourselves that time to figure out what's going to help us heal.
Well, I think what you're doing with the Center for Earth-Based Healing is admirable. Like I said in the beginning, I hope that you get the funding that's needed. I hope that you continue to use your gifts and your compassion and your knowledge to helping survivors. I don't think there can be enough people out there doing it. I do want to praise you and acknowledge that in October you did a crowdfunding and raised $10,000 for your nonprofit.
Yeah, and actually we raised more than that because, you know, with the unexpected loss of our funding, the first thing we did was, okay, let's just get some money in the bank and try to at least offer one or two more programs and see where we're at. So we started a crowdfunding campaign with the support of 114 amazing people and a lot of prayers from a whole lot of other people. We were able to raise $10,000, and then a woman who actually attended one of my programs, and she says, your program changed my life and saved my life. She's now in a radically different place than she was when she attended our program several years ago. And she's in a healthy relationship, is stabilized, has a good job. She works for a company who was interested in starting to give back. And when they had a conversation about that, she was like, well, you all don't know my story, but I'm going to share it. And so her company, Golo, offered to match that $10,000 if we could raise it. So we raised the $10,000. We had our next program in September because of that support. And then I drove up to Delaware, where Golo is located, in September, and they handed me a check for another $10,000. So that's the money that we currently have in the bank that we're going to hang on to see what happens when we revision this thing, to see how can we make this sustainable and maybe use even less resources.
Well, as someone running a nonprofit and doing what you've done, you've applied for grants, you've done the crowdfunding. Why do you think you've been successful, and how can you advise other people to sort of copy some of the things that you've done to make it successful so that other people who want to help and do their part for society can maybe use you as an example of how they can also succeed?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it has anything whatsoever to do with one thing, two things, or three things that I've done, but I think makes somebody successful is that they have done their own personal work, so they know what their heart is in alignment with and what makes them passionate. So when you're passionate about something, it's really hard to wake up in the morning and say, I quit. And trust me, I've had those moments. I mean, I have them all the time.
Right.
Visionaries and people who are trying to bring something creative into this world, we do not have a roadmap. It's an absolute journey of faith and trust. And I have no idea if a year from now the
Right.
Center for Earth-Based Healing is going to continue operating. But the passion in my heart, and I can feel my energy starting to flow in my body right now when I talk about it. That is what you have to learn how to tap into. What is it that sets your heart on fire? I actually heard somebody once say, what is it that you can't not do? Go do that. In some
That's a
way,
great
shape, or
motivator,
form.
because I'm the same way.
Yeah.
You tell me I can't do it, I want to get it done.
Yeah. And
Speaking about getting it done, because we're running close to time, but I also want to share that you are also a world-class whistler.
Yeah.
Which, I think is unique talent in its own. And you tell me about the competition that you just participated in.
Yeah, this is this is an example of how these crazy things just kind of pop up in my life. So I composed a song playing the ukulele and a couple of other instruments, accompanying myself and whistling. I've been able to whistle my whole life, but I did not know that this was a skill. I had no idea. I posted this video on Facebook. People went crazy. I'm like, well, what's the deal? I had no idea. Googled, whistling music and found that there is the Masters of Musical Whistling International Festival and Competition. And I was 3 days away from the deadline to submit an audition video. So I did. I got in, and I traveled to Pasadena, California this summer and competed. I didn't win one of the top 3 spots, but I did have the organizer of the whole competition pull me aside after my performance, and she said, "You were the only one that made people cry." And she said, "Had I known that they were not going to give you one of the top 3 spots, I would have created an honorable mention for you on the spot." So, I mean, I was out there just to have fun and have a journey. I'm not big into competition personally. I think it's more important just to create spaces to be creative. But it was a totally out of the blue, unexpected thing. But I'm now incorporating whistling into my musical compositions because apparently people enjoy it. So.
Oh, we are out of time. I could talk to you all day long. I want to thank Michele for being my guest today and sharing her story. And remember, every cloud has a silver lining.